Hey, Justin,
Hey, Michelle.
what did one fly say to another?
I don't know. What did one fly say to another, Michelle?
Pardon me, is this stool taken?
Oh, that is so bad.
I thought you would appreciate that. Fly humor.
Bugs and poo, you can't go wrong.
Well, my two favorite things. All right. On that note, welcome everybody to Plant Prescription, a podcast where Justin, my counterpart, and myself talk about plants, bugs, answer some of your questions, and hopefully share a few laughs along the way. So, Justin, do we have good questions this week?
We have great questions this week. First one comes from Natalie in Red Bluff, California. She said, my friends say I shouldn't water right after I repot to avoid root rot, but I have always done it. What's your take, Costa experts?
Hmm. What I want to get your opinion on this before I answer this one because I have two schools of thought on this. So what do you think?
I have one school of thought, and it's definitively I always water right after I repot
Mm-hmm.
because when you're repotting, typically the soil is really loose, the medium is really loose, and there's lots of air pockets. And to me, that just dramatically increases the opportunity for something to dry out that shouldn't dry out, especially if you're doing it outside. And
Okay,
so I
counter.
always give my plants a good soaking.
I usually do as well. Um, and I would note on this, normally I start with just pure water. I know some people may start with like a water and fertilizer. I would be kind of nervous about that one just because if there is any sort of laceration or like tear or damage on the roots, I would just want that to heal a little bit before adding some salts. But again, it's probably not a big deal if you fertilize right off the bat. I probably accidentally do that quite more frequently than I think I do because I just pot up so many plants all the time. Um, Now, I see where you're coming from, and I agree. 99.999% of the time, I do the same thing. I always water right after I pot just because if you think about it, the plant's already gone through a stress event. You've
Yo,
taken it out of its home and you've shoved it into another home.
and
Maybe,
chances are you've exposed the roots to air in the process.
right, right. Maybe not shoving, maybe more delicate. I don't know. I'm sure Justin and I are both of the same mindset. We're like, bloop, bloop, bloop. If you can't see, I'm just whipping things around like an Italian here. Um, we just do a lot of potting. Maybe you're not shoving things. Regardless, it has changed environments. And so it is stressed. And so the last thing you want to do is add more stress. And more stress would be not watering. However, I will say you and I disagree on this whole root wrapping and untangling the roots thing. And this is where we're going to disagree even more on that. If I ever have to untangle the root ball and kind of tease the roots out, I sometimes will wait a day before watering. Or if I have to cut a plant, right? If I have to cut it on the stem for whatever reason, maybe I'm just splitting it in two. I usually will try to let that callus, but if it's a plant I'm nervous about callusing, I'll probably stick it in the dirt just to give it a spot to stay. And in those scenarios where I know I have open lacerations, I may wait a day, maybe, if I'm patient enough and if I didn't callus it.
That waiting doesn't have anything to do with root rot, right?
N- no. Well,
You seem very confused
yeah,
by that.
I guess I forgot the whole question. My mind is not processing much today. Okay, so what I'm trying to say though is if you cut it and you stick it in the soil and you water it, if it's an open wound and you
Hmm.
are keeping you're not letting it dry out and heal, then yeah, kind of. If your roots are torn because you had to tear them all apart, which I don't do, but if I had to, I would be cautious about watering. And 100% if I did water in that scenario, just because the plant is like a calathea and it can't handle a dry down, and I refuse to wait for it to heal itself. I'm going to water that thing. I always go in with water, not fertilizer, because I know that there's open lacerations on there.
All right.
So,
So, Natalie,
yes,
oh,
water your plants, right, Justin?
so yes, I always water. Um, but if you are afraid of open wounds, then you may want to wait a day or two, according to Michelle's line of thinking.
So long as it's not calathea, peace lily, a whole lot of things that like water. There's a lot of exceptions here. I feel like this is not as straightforward of a question. 99% of the time, I think we agree, yes, water.
Yeah, I have never not watered immediately after repotting something
Yep.
in my way too many years of repotting.
I have only done it once or twice, and it is when I cut the stem on something and I knew that I hadn't done my due diligence and it wasn't fully calloused.
Okay, perfect. We hope that helps you, Natalie. Second question comes from Stevie in Alexandria, Minnesota, my home state. When you talk about scouting for pests on your podcast, what exactly do you look for? That's a great question
All right, I'm going to jump
because
in.
I'm
I
guessing
was
it's.
giving you an opportunity, but
Oh no, this is all you, Michelle. This is
I'm jumping in.
100% Michelle.
Okay, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. All right. So number one, look at the whole plant. Let's start from like going really far out to really close in, right? So when you're looking and the plant is farther away from you, just look and see if there's any sort of damage. Like, does a plant look healthy? Do you see webbing? Do you see yellowing? Do you see like sticky stuff on the leaves or black stuff, God forbid? Do you see any of that stuff far away? Do you see anything? Or possibly is your plant wilting and you know you watered it, right? So all of these symptoms is your plant just look unhealthy. Is it yellow? Is it wilting, etc.? So at a distance, check that. Move in a little bit closer, and check to see if you obviously see anything on the plant. 90, let's say 90% of the time. I don't want to, 99 is a strong one. 90-ish% of the time, most of your problems are going to be on the undersides of the leaves or on the stems. Um, Very rarely, I mean, there are thrips that you're going to see on the tops of leaves. Um, Hopefully never, but maybe some fungi or bacteria that you'll see on the tops of leaves as well. Because pests here are not, I'm not referring to just insects, I'm referring to bacteria, fungi, insects, and mites. So look at your plant a little bit closer. Focus on the bottom of the leaves first, and depending on the pest, you're going to have to take a really, really, really close look at those. Um, Aphids are fairly easy to see, and they will typically be on the bottoms of the leaves or on the stems. They're about like a half a size of a pea or half a grain of rice. So most people can see that. They may have to get closer, go farther out. Thrips are a little bit harder to see because they are a little bit smaller than aphids. They look like tiny little sausage bugs. A good thing with thrips would be to look for the damage because they're so small. It's easier to look for the damage, and the damage is like kind of silvery scrape marks, for lack of a better term, or just scrape marks on a plant. And you'll notice there's some, if you look at the tissue, there's some areas where it just seems to be scraped away, like little small irregular areas and spots. So that could be an indication that there's thrips there. And then if you see that kind of scraping, look closer for those little tiny sausage bugs. Uh, they can vary in color. Same thing with aphids. Those they can all vary in color. So color wouldn't be a good indicator for either of those. Spider mites is probably a number one thing you're going to find on your houseplants. 12 months of the year. And those are very difficult to see unless you know what you're looking for. So, what do you look for? Spider mite damage looks like little pinpricks, little yellowing pinpricks. Is that how you would describe it, Justin?
That's exactly how I would describe it.
Okay. Like little yellowing pinpricks on the leaves, and it can kind of look a little sandy and grainy too. And this is pretty gross, but you can actually just kind of take the leaf and rub it between your fingers. And if it does feel a little sandy or grainy, it could be spider mites. Um, It's gross because you're squishing a bunch of mites. But hey, you know what? Biocontrol, like there's your physical control there. You're just going with your human fingers and you're like the biggest villain in the world. It's like Godzilla. So mites, look for the damage. Rub it if you see stuff there and if it feels a little bit sandy, try to take a closer look. A lot of spider mites, if you have a lot of them, if they've gone undetected and they've just like made a lot of babies, you will likely see some webbing. Hence the name spider mites. They are web creating mites. And you may see some webbing. It's very fine webbing, and it typically stays pretty close to the plant tissue. So it's going to be tucked in with that leaf. It's not going to go from like the leaf to the ceiling. That's probably a spider. And that is how I would kind of look. And if you can see webbing, if you find it, first of all, I'm so sorry that you have webbing because it means you have a lot of spider mites. Secondly, just stare at the webbing for a while. You don't need to find a mite. You just stare at it, and your eyes are going to pick up on movement. And those are the little mites walking in the webbing like a little railway station or little Amtrak on the plant. So stare at it. You got a couple of minutes. Just stare at it, and your eyes will pick up on those little tiny pinpricks moving. Likely, if there's webbing, those are bad mites. We won't get into that's complicated. We won't get into the other part of it for now. With fungus and bacteria, scouting fungus and bacteria, you're going to want to do two things. You're going to want to look at the leaves and look for, any sort of laceration or hole or mark. Like the marks can vary from purple to yellow to orange to I think I cover brown. Obviously, brown's a big one, brown and black. So they're going to vary, but if you start to see these like holes and patterns on your leaves, it could be fungi or bacteria. They don't just affect the leaves, they can also affect the stem, which is a big bummer when that happens. And they can also affect your roots. So root rot, pythium, is a disease, and you typically would scout for disease and bugs and insects and pests and mites. So if you suspect if your plant is wilting, there could be some sort of fungal infection, hopefully it's fungal, going on in your root system. It could, I'm not going to go any farther than that. We'll just stick with most of the time it's probably fungal. Um, it's really difficult to tell the differences between the two, but we actually just did an episode talking about bacteria and bacteria streaming. So go check that other one out if you want to figure out if you've got spots and you want to know if it's bacteria or fungal. When it comes to root issues and stem issues, if it's bacteria, odds are it's going to be a little oozy, for lack of a better word. I know you love that one, Justin. Oozy. Um, So it'll probably be a little bit oozy. And then if it's a root rot, just if you look at your roots and they're not white, not all plant roots are white. This is such a difficult question. I feel like we have to have a master course on scouting because there's a lot that goes into it. And the team that's scouting the crops on the farms, they do so much. They're always looking for these things. And depending on the crop and the situation, it's gonna determine what they look at and how they look at it. It's a complex topic. With your roots, not all of them are white. Some of them are off-white. That's normal. That plants are not always have white roots. But one way to tell if it's an unhealthy root is to just kind of take a piece of that root. And if you can easily, I mean, like, don't yank it. If you can easily tear it off of the rest of the roots, if you can easily break the roots apart, there's something going on there. Because the roots should give you some sort of resistance. A light tug should not tear them apart from each other. I'm going to stop. Let you. Do you have any interjections?
Nope. I totally agree with everything that you're saying there.
It's a very complex topic. Look far away, look for damage first. If you see damage, look closer. I would highly recommend if you have plants that are repeat culprits, or if you have a lot of plants, just make it a habit to flip a couple of leaves every week, right? Um, there's different ways of scouting. You can flip a leaf and look at the bottom of it, but that is very tedious and time consuming. Depending on the amount of plants you have, it may be the best option if you have a lot, depending on your situation, how your plants are organized. You can also kind of just hit the plants and see if anything falls out. That's really for somebody who is very good at looking at teeny tiny little mites. And you usually have a white paper underneath that. It's called a bang board technique. Where you bang them out and you're like, what fell on this paper? Let's see what goodies I have today. It's actually kind of funny. It's like mining for coal, right? Or mining for gold. When you hit these things, you're like, oh, what's on the paper? It's just normally in our facilities, it's so many cool things. You've got like Oreos. Sometimes you get a ladybug and you're like, oh, there's a ladybug. Like, how exciting, because it's this big thing on a piece of paper. And sometimes you see mites, which is a bummer, or thrips. But it's never usually just one thing. There's a lot of things that fall out. So that's a tricky one because you're going to have to identify a lot of things. And I feel like I'm talking a lot. Scouting is tricky. It is very in depth. It varies depending on the plant. If you have a plant that typically gets spider mites, instead of waiting for damage, look at the leaves preemptively, maybe once a week, once every other week, whenever you remember to do it, to try to look and see if there's anything kind of moving on the leaf. I'm done. I'm really done this time.
All right. So I have a special bonus follow-up then for you.
Okay.
When you are purchasing a new plant, like let's say you go to your local home improvement store, do you scout differently than you do the plants at home, or do you use the same process? Is there anything special about the acquisition of a new plant?
That's a good question. Um,
Why, thank you.
I I'm that kind of person who isn't even buying plants in the stores and I'm scouting. That's me. I'm just always scouting the plants regardless.
Well, you are a professional IPM manager,
I'm
so
just like, what's on here? Ooh, what do they have? Because you usually can find something or other. Um, I would say that when you're trying to select plants, especially if it's, a plant that's a little higher on your price point or whatever it may be, and you're really trying to pick out the best possible one. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even, it could be a $5 plant or a $1 plant. If you're trying to pick out the best possible plant, I look at the whole table and see if there's anything that like pops up as that doesn't look right. It's yellow, it's wilting, something's going on there. And I typically stay far away from that plant, right? So the plants that are touching that one, usually I go in and take a closer look and confirm it's a bug or something. But all those plants that were touching that on that table could possibly have that as well. So I kind of stay away from that radius right there if I see something. And then when I find a plant that I think is beautiful, I like the structure of it, I pick the plant up just to look, see how it looks in my hand, see the full structure of it. And I usually do look, but the way I do is I have the plant in my hand and I just do a quick look. I lift the pot up. So it's a little slightly higher than my head, and I kind of just look up under the leaves that way. So I don't have to flip a billion leaves at once. I can just get a quick snapshot. Is there anything glaringly obvious here or not? And that usually suffices for me. But as we've gone over, I also don't usually quarantine my plants, so I'm pretty reckless when it comes to bringing plants in. What about you? How do you scout for plants?
I've never really thought about it as scouting in a formal way, but yeah,
Hmm.
I do a very similar thing to you, where first I look for damage,
Hmm.
and then I look for actual physical signs. Um, aphids always jump out right away because they're so obvious in comparison to a lot of the other pests.
Right.
Um, I know that I should, if I were more careful, spend more time looking for mealybugs, because they like to hide out in petioles and places like that that aren't as obvious as the bottom of the leaf. But
Yep.
I usually don't. Um, spider mites, I look for the stippling, the pinpricks. I have never really paid attention to thrips. I know they exist, but I've been lucky enough to never encounter them.
Oh no, somebody
Um,
please out there knock on wood. Knock on wood for Justin right now.
okay, desk.
This is not wood.
Uh,
My desk is fake wood, so it doesn't, yeah.
mine is real wood, so I hope we're
Ooh.
covered there. Um, s Scale I do tend to look for
Oh yeah.
because Yeah, because scale's a nasty one.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is. I really don't like scale.
Depending on the store and how busy the store is, I will slip the plant out of the pot to look at its roots in the store.
Yes.
Although there are some cases where it's just not very convenient to do that.
You got like a 5-gallon plant and a
Yeah,
7 foot
or
tall.
yeah, or there are like six other people in the houseplant section, and you know,
You don't want to be
you
that
just
guy.
well, you just don't have room. Yeah, you're like navigating. You have to get out of the way from the person's cart so they don't mow you down as they're looking
Mm-hmm.
at the plants, or
Mm-hmm.
um, get tripped by the person with the dog leash, or.
Wow, what places are you going to? They seem really like very fluid wherever you're going. There's a lot of action there.
Yeah, my local Lowe's, there's always people in the houseplant section, and I feel like 25%, that's probably hyperbole. 25% of the people who go to my Lowe's bring their dogs,
Aw,
which is always very fun to look at. But yeah, it makes
yeah.
it makes houseplant shopping more interesting when you're not moving, when you're stationary.
Or when you're looking down, like to make sure you don't step on an animal, like
Yes,
another,
yes,
yes.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Because often other people are focused enough on their plants too that
yeah, they
yeah.
are. Yeah. It's just such a, it's, wow, that was not a word. That was a ta 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 ta. It's, wow. It is such an exciting thing, I think, for a lot of people to find that plant, right? I know, especially for me, I have a number of plants on my list where if I saw them in real life, I would tunnel vision straight up, would not
Yeah.
see anything else coming my way. I would just descend upon that plant. And it's so cool. It's a beautiful thing. But you're right. I could see that. I do it. One thing I did want to bring up that you mentioned, I totally forgot to talk about mealybugs. I think personally, based on all the mealybugs I've seen, sometimes it's easier to take a full-on top-down look at the plant if you're looking for mealybugs. A lot of them will go under the leaves; they'll be on the bottoms of the leaves, but so a full-on top down, like bird's eye view of the plant, is going to give you a better window into those nooks and crannies, which is where a lot of them like to hang out. Whereas if you're looking at it from an angle, like a 90 or 45-degree angle, you could miss them because they could be hidden behind the stem. But that
They
top,
are devious little
v-
creatures.
very devious. And I think a lot of people get that little Trojan horse mealybug that comes in on their plants and then it's like game over. Cause if
Hmm.
I were to call any bug a Trojan, it would be mealybugs. They are Trojan horses because
Yes.
you usually can't see them. Um, but it's ironic because they're so white and bright and like way more visible than a spider mite, but they're just really good and at hiding in plain
Yeah.
sight. But the top down will give
Well,
you a better view. Yeah, what were you gonna say?
oh, and like when they're big, yeah, they're a lot more obvious, but the crawlers,
Oh,
you know,
yeah,
they're they're kind of not a great color to spot,
no.
even though they're not like, it's not like they're super camouflaged, but there's something about that sort of
Well, they're not.
tan that
They haven't developed their waxy cuticle yet,
yeah,
so they're not white. They're like, yeah, like
beige.
yeah, beige. Yes. I don't know why that word just made me laugh. You're pushing my buttons. Uh, I'm just gonna preface this. Before the podcast, Justin said he liked my accent, and I said, "What accent?" Apparently, I say buttons in a strange way. So anyway, I'm
A
gonna use
different
buttons
way.
more.
No judgment here.
No, I'm
You can say
I'm
buttons
flattered.
however you want, Michelle.
You said you like the way I say buttons, so I'm gonna say buttons all the time now.
Exactly. I know, it makes me
Okay.
happy.
I feel like we've beat this one to the death and made scouting a lot more
Okay.
difficult, but I'm glad we kind of shed light on how complicated it all is.
And Stevie, if you or anybody else has further questions, you want to dig deeper into scouting, you know how to contact us, questions@costafarms.com. Um, Question number 3 is also insect related today. Dawn
Oh,
from Marion, Indiana said, "What's the best way to bring my houseplants outside for the summer? I'm afraid
Okay.
they'll die or get bugs if I do. Oh,
I have
Michelle's
a
making a face.
I have a stronger opinion on this one. Um, I'm trying to process it and like make it chewable, like bite-sized
Okay.
form.
All right.
It's more of an
Well, while
emotion
you're
I
thinking,
felt. Okay.
yeah. All right. While you're thinking,
Yes.
I would say, Dawn, you don't necessarily need to be afraid that the minute you put your plant outside, all of the pests in your yard are going to say, "This is it. This is it. This is it." I have moved plants in and out, and I've had very little reintroduction of pests into the house. So while it can happen, I don't think it happens as much as most people are afraid it does. Especially if you keep your plant really happy and healthy. If you
Yep.
water it adequately, if it's got good light, it's going to do a better job. It's probably going to do a better job of resisting pests outdoors than it is indoors. The
Exactly. I'm
other,
giving you the finger guns right now. Yes. What was the other
yes,
thing?
thank you for clarifying finger guns and not just saying I'm giving you the finger right now. Um, the other the other thing is that outside there's the whole ecosystem. And so there's a good chance if you have pests in your yard, you also have the natural predators for that pest. And so if you attract pests onto your plant, nature may try to help take care of that for you. All
Aside
right, it
from the
looks like
natural. Oh, I'm bursting here. I'm
all
ready
right.
to.
All right, Michelle has collected her thoughts. Let the
Well,
floodgates
actually,
open, Michelle.
you very eloquently said what I was feeling because I was like, this is a question that comes up frequently. And I think the reason I had the reaction was because this is a very common thing that a lot of people think, I'm going to put my plant outside. I'm scared because it's safe inside from the bugs. But to Justin's point, 100% what he said. If you bring a plant outside, you're also introducing it to rain, which is a great pest control agent, as well as naturally occurring predators. And also keep in mind, the plant that's inside of your house doesn't necessarily have a pest outside, right? And not all the pests are in that area in your area are going to be like, oh, Calathea is my favorite because I know that I'm just going to say 99.99% sure, Justin, correct me on this. Calatheas are not native to, let's say, New York.
You're definitely correct. There are
Okay.
no
I'm so
calatheas
afraid to
native
make
to New
like,
York City.
they are not native, but they are not, right? And so this is a plant that you're going to put outside and they're not going to know what to do with it. Maybe. I'm not saying that they won't, but this is another thing to take into consideration is that a lot of these house plants are not indigenous there. And so they may not have a pest that is waiting for it there, right? It may be like, oh, cool. I've never had this exotic snack or appetizer before. This is cool. But they're not gonna, like Justin said, descend on it because most of the time they probably don't know what it is. And I just want to do a case study thing to emphasize this, right? So alocasias, beautiful example. In the winter, they live inside of the house, and boy howdy, they have so many spider mites on them in the winter, and it's like you just wipe it down, and your little cloth, this brown speckled spider mite,
Carcasses.
dead mites. Yes, thank you. I just feel like I just don't want to be the gross one in this podcast, but carcasses, yes, cadavers, whatever. Um, and then that's the winter, right? The winter is like, oh my goodness, it's just like powdered with mites. You bring it outside in the summer, and it grows, first of all, much faster outside in the summer. And the rain, the natural predators. I mean, you got ladybugs out there most areas in the world, I would say, with the probably exception of like Antarctica, and a few other places. But you have things out there. You have natural predators out there, and they're not gonna like it's not gonna be their main course, but they're definitely gonna snack on that because they're hungry. So alocasias outside in the summer, yeah, they may have a couple of mites on them, but it's nothing compared to the number of mites that you would see on them inside. And if I were to leave that poor alocasia inside throughout the whole summer and not give it the opportunity to go outside and grow and get a good rain washing, oh my gosh, that thing would be like a one leaf plant for its entire life. That's my case study. Alocasias, try it. They'll get them outside. Another thing is outside, you can hose them down. If you've got rain, that's great. Or if you're in an area that doesn't get a lot of rain, if you're watering your plants, just kind of flick the hose up and try to get under those leaves, and that'll be more than what you need in most scenarios. You won't usually need to apply an insecticide if you're washing them off with a water. Okay.
And if your plants do happen to get pests, tying back to the previous question, you can scout them before you bring them in. Say, oh, look,
Yeah.
there's a baby aphid or what have you, and treat it appropriately before you bring it in so that it is less of a concern that you're going to introduce pests.
I forgot about the bringing it in part. That part's a little bit trickier. Bringing it out is easy because it's just like, hallelujah, I got sunshine, and it's rain and all this stuff that I'm used to, nature. Bringing it in is a whole different story. I agree with you. However, I have been burned so many times by bringing my plants in the fall. And then all of my plants get aphids. The only time I get aphids is when I bring my plants in the fall. That's it. Any other time I usually don't get aphids, but gets me every time. So I usually bring them in and keep them in an area by themselves for a little while and kind of let those aphids grow. I kind of just forget about them. And then if there are aphids on them, well, I'm definitely going to see them in a couple of weeks. And then I treat them and then put them where they need to be.
And then you buy the box of ladybugs from your
No.
local.
Oh, why? Oh,
I'm
no.
sorry, it was too easy.
No,
Um,
I don't do
for
that.
those of you who don't know the reference, this was a plant myth we handled in a previous episode. It is not nearly as helpful or beneficial to release ladybugs inside your house as most people would like to think it is.
Please stop the madness.
All right, that's a great segue into today's myth.
Okay.
It doesn't have to do with ladybugs, but it does have to do with, I think, a greater marketplace trend.
Okay.
Um, Horticultural charcoal. I see more and more people talking about how it's great for their plants. And now I want to preface this by saying I kind of got sucked into the trend a little bit. Like, no, 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 not for my plants. Um, but for like my toothpaste, I'm like, oh my goodness, this toothpaste has charcoal.
Ah,
It's going to detoxify my mouth. That's great. And then I was reading a study that said we don't know that much about how horticultural charcoal works in toothpaste and whether it is going to absorb the fluoride that's in the toothpaste. And really, the fluoride is the whole reason that you're using the toothpaste. And so,
I
yeah,
did
I
not know
stopped.
any of these things. I'm shaking my head, but I'm learning so much about toothpaste right now. I had no idea. No idea that charcoal was absorbing the floor. I did not know that.
Well, we don't
In
know, and that's
toothpaste?
the
Right,
thing.
right. I did not
But
know
if
that
it
that was
does,
even
yeah,
why. I just thought it was something because like the charcoal masks and the toothpaste that makes your
exactly.
teeth
It's all meant
whiter
to
and
detoxify.
the soil additive that makes your plants healthier. I mean, honestly, what can't charcoal do? You know what it reminds me of? You're thinking.
I feel like it's there, but
You
tell me.
know where I'm going with this. I feel like if anyone knows, it's you. Okay, I'm just gonna say it. My big fat Greek wedding.
Oh, nope, totally didn't get that
Nope,
one.
no. Okay, totally different. I think he uses what was it? It was spray. It was I can't remember what it was, but it was like some sort of
Windex.
the voice from above has spoken that it was Windex. he uses Windex on everything, and it like the girl has a zip, and he sprays it with Windex. And I forgot there's a lot of other elements in that movie, and he's like, "Here's Windex." I feel like that's charcoal, and I've basically just given my opinion of this away by comparing it to Windex and saying it's a cure-all, but it's probably not. So, do you know why charcoal has become this thing with plants?
I assume the same reason it has for toothpaste and face masks, and the whole sense of detoxifying and purifying.
Okay. I have heard several things. It's come up a lot. I follow a lot of plant pages and plant stuff. It's all I do. So it's come up a lot. I've seen charcoal come up in the discussions, and one of the things is, yeah, I think it's like detoxifying, but another thing is that it actually is like a nutrient bank, I think is what it's kind of designed to be, right? You have charcoal and it just gathers all these nutrients and makes it available to the plant. But isn't that a catch 22, right? If it's gathering all these nutrients, if it's actually doing that, if it's doing that, I don't know. But if it is, it's taking the nutrients. And it's not going to just be like, "Oh, here, you can have them back." Like what?
Right.
So,
Yeah, that's the same reason with the potential issue with the fluoride in the toothpaste. If it's absorbing the stuff that you want to be adding to make it better, then
right.
it's sort of a neutral rather than a benefit.
Right. And I'm just going to say one more thing. Um Charcoal to me sounds alkaline. It sounds like it's not an acidic component. It sounds like it's on the higher pH scale.
I would
So
guess you're right.
I don't have the numbers in front of me. This again, full disclosure, is a guess. It sounds like it. Um, so if it is making your media, if it is an alkaline component, if it's a higher pH, and if it's making everything around it a higher pH, if you get really nerdy and you look at a nutrient availability graph for just say an average plant, I think tomatoes, I think that's kind of the standard. I'm not sure, but every plant's going to be a little bit different in its preferred pH zone. But most plants, there are some plants that like it alkaline, they like the higher pH. I would say most, as a general rule of thumb, don't, because at that area, the nutrients are not available. And actually, I lied. This is pretty standard. The nutrient availability, I just confused myself, is pretty standard. Nutrients like iron, there's different forms of iron, and it's only available at a certain pH. So if your pH is not in that range, are you Googling right now?
No, sorry.
It would probably be a good thing to do that and Google it and like be like, fact check me right now. The pH and the nutrition, it is standard. If you have iron in this form, it is available at this pH range. If you have little, I don't know, iron is the only thing that's coming to mind because that's a big topic, but they are available at certain pHs. And so if you mess with that pH and shift it too far to the right, those aren't going to be available at all, let alone in the charcoal. We're going to go back to the charcoal and how it's probably not sequestering nutrients. So my theory and my opinion, purely opinion on this is charcoal may be adding an aeration component, right? Because it's large, it's
Hmm.
chunky, it may be adding extra air space and pore space, but I don't think it's adding a lot of benefits. In fact, I think that it could be over time skewing that pH in the wrong direction if you give it a long enough time. That's my theory. That's my
Okay,
opinion. What is
I'll
your
go with
opinion?
that. Yeah, I don't know the science behind it, but I will follow along with you in this case.
I don't know the
I should
science
have,
either.
yeah,
I'm just
I should
going
have
off
researched this one.
the other little things I know.
Yeah.
I don't know. So, charcoal though, if you're looking for something chunky, yeah, but you could also add bark or cocoa core chunks or, cocoa chunks or
Perlite.
whatever. Perlite, that's very neutral. Perlite's very neutral. I just get concerned with charcoal because it's not used in large scale production. And so I'm not saying that large scale production is, There are some things I've seen homeowners doing with plants. So I'm like, that's a really good idea. I wish that we could do that large scale. But it's not something that's generally discussed in large scale, which kind of makes me wonder
If there's a
where it
reason
came
for it.
from. Yeah. Okay. I'm afraid to say anything else and get in trouble. I'm done with activated charcoal.
All right. If any of you have strong opinions or know the science behind it, feel free to drop us a comment.
Please, yes. I would like to learn more about it. I am not very educated in this. I'm just going off of experience that I've had. Now, hold on. One last thing about activated charcoal. Terrariums. It's used in terrariums. I was hoping you would take that farther.
Yeah.
You didn't.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. I've actually used it in terrariums.
Okay.
As kind of a bottom layer of
Yes.
my terrarium. And I guess the assumption that I've always had, yeah, is that it's going to absorb stuff to try to help prevent stagnation if I have
Yes.
sitting water at the base there, because
Yep.
most terrariums don't have drainage.
Yep. Yeah. It is an interesting thing, though. Like, I would like to learn more about it. I haven't really done much legwork on it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Which is my mentality with my soil mix. So I haven't
Yeah.
added charcoal to any of my mixes. All right.
So there you go, everybody. Thank you very much for listening to this week's plant prescription. And as always, if you have questions, just reach out. You can DM us at Costa Farms on any of our social media channels, drop a comment on YouTube, or email us at questions@costafarms.com.
Bye bye.
Until next time.